Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here to work with this panel of really great women. So I'd like to open up our discussion this morning with a first question that's a look at the philosophy of each of the companies that you work for. Each of the companies you represent have built a reputation of being leaders when it comes to including the voices of women and experiences at your table. How did that come to be? Stephanie, you want to take the first shot at that question?
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here today. I think there's one word that comes to my mind when we're talking about, the philosophy at Fox Rothschild, and that is deliberate. I think that, when I joined the firm, I've been there, it'll be 14 years ago in June, I was the 5th woman to join our office. At the time, we had approximately 24 attorneys. Today, we now have 16 women attorneys, although the office has grown to about 44 attorneys. I think the number of women has grown exponentially. In addition, I was only the 2nd mom joining the group, and now we have 8 moms and a 1 mom to be. And I think just from a sort of an overall perspective, when I joined Fox Rothschild, although we had a women's initiative, that initiative initially was sort of a way for women to get together, to share their experiences, to network. And I think through that networking and sharing of experiences, we realized that we really needed to have a seat at the table. And if we needed to make change in the organization, we really needed it from the top down. And so from that standpoint, the Women's Initiative sort of shifted gears and became more of an advocacy group. And we switched to having 3 separate parts of the Women's Initiative, one being the leadership committee, which essentially attempts to get more women into leadership roles in Fox Rothschild. The other is having a connectivity group, which is to allow women to connect with one another, to share their experiences, to try and network, to try and cross-market. And the other, which I think is really important, is an associate steering committee. We recognize that, we haven't always had great women leaders that help us as we've come up in our professions. And we really wanted to provide that to the younger women associates in our office, and to also give them the opportunity to have leadership roles. So one of the things that we do is we partner with young women attorneys who are coming up through the ranks for partnership, and we guide them and mentor them through that journey, which is a several-year-long journey at Fox Rothschild, so that we put them in the best position to enable them to make partner. And I'm really happy to say that we've made great strides. We have, in looking at the leadership of our firm, we now, if you look at our C-suite, we have 8, C groups in our management, 3 of whom are women. Our chief talent officer is a woman, our chief business development and marketing officer is a woman, and our chief knowledge management officer is a woman. And I just think that it really comes from, as Katina talked about, the top down. In addition, in terms of leadership in Fox Rothschild, we also have office managing partners and department leaders, which gives women the opportunity to have a leadership role in the firm. And just this week, actually, there was an announcement as to new office managing partners that had been appointed. 3 out of the 6 new office managing partners were women. Out of the department chairs, 6, there were again 6 named, 2 were women. And I just think that allowing women to have leadership roles has been great. And I think that has come from our Women's Initiative group, but we would not be successful if we did not have people at the top of our organizations that buy into the idea that your business will run better if you have more diversity and if you give women a seat at the table. And I think our firm has been deliberate in that. Our women's initiative has been in that. And I think the reality is that has led to better policies for women, happier women, and an overall better business environment to work in.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie, for starting us off. Lots of action there at Fox Rothschild for sure. Deliberate, as Katrina was saying. Maureen, you want to share with us some of the philosophies and activities at West Pharmaceutical?
Sure, certainly. And I'm really pleased to be here representing West and also being amongst this group of women talking about the experiences of our organization. So West is a global company. We are just north of 9,000 people. And so as you can imagine, the complexities around how are we creating this environment where women can thrive, where people of color can thrive, where everyone can and thrive and be their best is certainly a challenge. And so I think for us, what it all goes back to is really our core values, because values influence who we are and the ways in which we act and behave. And it's also oftentimes becomes, a point of learning as we wrestle with what is or is not consistent with our values. And so being a global organization, one of our core values is what we call One West. And that's, I think, for me, a bellwether that allows us to really navigate the differences and similarities. And we do define diversity as both the differences and the similarities that bring us together. And so it is in how we then, as a community that belong to this organization, how do we navigate? And I would say that we're certainly work in progress, like many organizations. And we also have had some gains that we really are proud of. So for example, in 2018, when we were recognized, our executive team and board of directors were about 20% women. We are now closer to 30%. So I think that for us is an acknowledgement. As Stephanie talked about in terms of her organization, in our organization, our Women Initiative, similar names, Women's Initiative Network, or WIN, has a profound impact in terms of giving visibility, giving access, giving opportunities for learning and development, but also because all of our EBRGs have senior team sponsors, it also creates that connectivity where senior leaders have an opportunity to be involved as well. We can look at our philanthropic efforts where being able to support organizations such as this one that's sponsoring this event in helping to develop our pipeline of talent and in our communities so that we can prepare for having the talent pool that we want to be able to access. Looking at, I think as Dr. Sawyer mentioned, looking at our outreach and who are we helping to develop relationships with so people will see us as a viable employer. And they will say, oh, West, that's a place that I would really like to work, as well as doing the internal work to make sure that people do have a fair shot when they do come in our doors and they want to apply for a position. So a lot of these are the areas that we're working on. I would say one of the things that really helps us and makes us successful is the commitment that we have on our senior leadership team to really drive and be educated on areas where they need to have a deeper understanding of the challenges and the opportunities and what it means, as well as creating those opportunities for our employees to be involved and visible and have a voice. So I think those are some of the things I'd like to share at this point.
Great. Thank you, Maureen. We'll have a chance to dig a little deeper in those as we continue our discussion. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and head over to Lauren there so we can talk about a company that's a much different size than some of these other organizations here. And I think it's important to include that voice at this table as well. So Lauren, can you take away and talk about First Resource?
Sure thing. Thanks, Patty, and thanks for having me today. I certainly bring a different perspective to the table. I run a small business with only 55 employees that happens to be a bank. When it comes to valuing women in the workplace, this was the case from day one. As one of the founding members of the bank, there was always a seat for women at the table, and that philosophy is really ingrained in our culture. It's encouraging that so many companies are identifying opportunities for growth and are making a change for the better. Our philosophy is simple: do the right thing every day of the week. It's the golden rule. This includes creating opportunities for women to excel at work. It sounds easy, but actions truly speak louder than words. If someone expresses an interest in learning about a different part of the company, we invite them to meet with leaders in that area. They've got access to everyone. And we invite them to attend meetings as a guest to foster their real life on the job learning. This happens all the time. It's part of our culture. We have one of the most family-friendly work environments that I have ever seen. This did not happen by accident. It is intentional. We work very hard, but we have a very flexible approach to work-life balance. And boy, did the past year test those limits like nothing ever before, particularly for women, dealing with closed schools, kids learning at home on Zoom, all the while trying to work yourself all day. It was really very challenging for women in particular. And we worked really hard to make sure that this would work, that people could keep working while all the additional responsibilities at home. As president of the bank, I will leave in the middle of the day to go catch my son's basketball game, take my daughter to our doctor's appointment. The employees see me do that. I don't expect them to not be able to do exactly the same thing. I encourage my team to be there for their families in the same way. Setting the tone at the top is critical to get buy-in throughout every layer of the organization. We're small, we don't have the resources that the big companies have, but being small keeps us nimble, and you don't need to work for an entire, a huge company to be able to have a great philosophy and have a great structure to support women. I'm going to get into some interesting stats later, but I'm really happy to be here today. So thanks, Patty.
Great, thanks very much, Lauren. We're going to round out this opening part of our discussion this morning with Colleen Stratton from SEI, and she's going to share with us some of the philosophy at SEI with regard to women in the workplace. Colleen.
Thanks, Patty, and thank you so much for having me on the panel. So we really look at diversity as a business imperative at SEI. It's part of what has made us successful and helped us thrive through the 50+ years of our existence. It's really important that we constantly innovate, and we believe that the best innovation comes from putting people at a table that think differently. And so, that has changed over time, how we actually look at diversity in the workplace, but the actual element of making sure that you have people who think differently come together and work on problems has not changed since 1968 for our organization. I'm going to tiptoe into your next question, if that's okay, Patty, but part of what I wanted to talk about is that 2017 was a catalyst year for us. So 2017, we all know, was the Me Too movement. It was really the intersection of the Me Too movement and the gender pay initiative that we had in our UK office. And that really put a spotlight on women in particular in the workforce for us. And so we started a bunch of campaigns to really say, are we doing what we can to make sure that women have a seat at the table as much and as frequently as we would like them to within the organization? Always like to say it takes a village to raise anything, right? So we put together a village, we put together some of the most senior women at the company, and we founded a campaign that was called the Get, Grow, Keep campaign. And this was around recruiting, retaining, and developing women within the organization. But we realized as we did that we really had to start somewhere. And so where we started was part of what Katina was talking about, was like, we need to think about the business case, and we need to be able to influence and change people at the very top of the organization. So we started with gathering a lot of data and putting together actually a dashboard of where women were within the organization. So we looked at things like our external candidate pool, our internal candidate pool. We looked at promotions, we looked at people leaving the organization, and we looked at people, just a general movement within the organization. And from that, we were able to determine a couple of inflection points. Two of them were really common to everybody, but one of them was unique to women. So the two that were common to everybody were at year 2 and year 5. We had people leaving the organization at those years, and they were for all different reasons, but the year 5 one was particularly painful. But what we saw in our women was that we had women self-selecting out of the interview process, moving from the supervisor level to the manager level. They either left the company or they decided not to get up to that next level. And so we took that on as a particular initiative to say what is going on there and how can we look to change that, because we want to get more women into the most senior levels of the organization. And in order to do that, we really have to have a feeder pool at the manager level and the supervisor level. So I'm sure we'll talk about it in subsequent discussion, but we've done a lot of work in that area to say, how can we continue to make sure that women are getting promoted up within the organization. A lot of the focus that people want to look at, which we always do as well, is the recruiting pool, but we also want to make sure that we're looking at the internal pool just as strongly as we are the external pool.
Awesome. Thank you for kicking that part off for us, Colleen. So I want to get a little bit deeper into the actual actions that are taking place at each of your organizations. I know some of you have shared portions of those in your opening comments here, but for this next, I'd like to kind of look at this where rubber meets the road, where the real action takes place, right? So bringing it down a little bit more. And I'm going to start with you, Maureen, because in looking at your bio, it says that you're currently working with West Pharmaceutical Services on developing and executing a strategy encompassing employee experience, diversity, and inclusion. So can you give us some of those specific actions, just as Katrina mentioned in her comments? You know, it's nice to say those things, but how are you actually putting them into place?
Thank you so much. My favorite question. So thank you. So I'm really excited about this idea of being able to blend employee experience and diversity and inclusion together. If we think about, if we have like 9,500 employees, we've got 9,500 employee experiences that shift day to day to day. And so how can we make sure that people who are part of our community, as they go about their days and do the work where they're committing and contributing so much of themselves to the success of this organization, how can they feel that they're being valued? How can they feel recognized? How can they feel that they have opportunities? And so that's, I think, in blending those ideas of employee experience and diversity inclusion, those are some of the opportunities that we have. And so some of the ways that we're going to look at that is, one is going to, we're calling the moments that matter. So kind of going, rather than going to a macro level, we go to a micro level. And we want to identify what are specific moments through the course of an employee's journey throughout West, from the point in time when they become aware of us to the time that they leave for whatever reason. What are the moments to them that say, this is a positive place for me. This is a place that I want to be. This is an organization where I feel that I can be at my best. And if we can define what those moments are, then I think we can deconstruct them to find out what is it that makes those moments successful. So for example, I think one of the classic moments is getting and receiving feedback and giving feedback, which we all know is really critical to advancement and to improving in terms of performance as well as development. We also know that women and people of color are more likely to say that they do not receive constructive, substantive feedback. And we know that managers sometimes feel uncomfortable giving direct feedback to women and people of color because they don't want to be misperceived. So how can we take that one moment and look at it from both the employee's perspective, from the manager's perspective, and then help to upskill both of them so that they can really have a substantive interaction that works for all of our West employees, you know, given their diversity, their gender, and all those other dimensions that are going to come into play. So that is a key critical part, one of the ways in which we want to be able to advance our idea of employee experience and diversity inclusion through employee experience. Certainly, I think there's other things that we want to do around developing leaders and looking at critical roles within our organization where there are issues with either, as we look at the incumbents within that particular role and we don't see the diversity that we think should be there, as we look at the talent pipeline for those roles and we don't see the diversity that we can be there, is how can we intervene and really do a targeted, focused effort of thinking about how we can both groom and develop and accelerate the development of people within the organization who can be, you know, viable candidates for those roles, either 1 or 2 or 3 jobs away. At the same time, how can we also be clear around where we have opportunities to bring in talent to the organization to fill those gaps? We're going through a process of looking at many of our critical positions through the lens of what makes somebody successful in this role and what are the key criteria to be successful in this role. And it kind of gets to what Dr. Sawyer talked about earlier around really focusing on the behaviors and what is it that someone needs to do. And then how can we both upskill people who are currently in the role and a part of that would be how can they be more inclusive leaders and managers as well as preparing people who we want to see in the pipeline for those roles, and making sure that it is as diverse as it possibly can. So those are just a few of the ways that we're thinking about bringing this to life.
Great. Thanks very much, Maureen, for adding that for us this morning. So I'm going to go back to you, Stephanie. You talked a lot about, I think the Women's Initiative is the program that you were focusing on. Can you give us a little, an idea of how that went from an idea to an action? When that all started, what was the, if you know, what was the impetus for that? What got that going?
Yeah, so I joined the firm in 2007, so about 14 years ago. And I do recall it was probably, we were winning awards at that time, for top 50 women, top 50 law firms for working mothers from Working Mother magazine. But I think that there was just a little bit of discontentment of, well, we don't have to do more, we need women leaders at the top. And in looking at our top at that point in time, there were not a lot of women leaders, and there were not a lot of either in the C-suite or in the department chair heads or practice chair heads. And so there was sort of a core group of the Women's Initiative that went, and in 2007, we were much smaller. We had 7 offices. Now we have 22 offices coast to coast. Back then we were probably less than 500 attorneys. Now we're, almost to 1,000 attorneys. So the firm has grown, but I think we managed to approach the leaders of our firm, the chair of the firm, and say to them, look, the firm will benefit if there are more women leaders. How can we work together to get there? And that's when the different policies and philosophies came up about, making the Women's Initiative more concrete, more action oriented. And we came up with the 3 different buckets, 3 different committees. And I do think that we started to get buy-in from everyone, realizing that, yes, this actually is a good thing for our firm. And it's been great because over the years, I've seen so many policies change for the better when it comes to women working in the workplace. One of those policies is surrounding, I think when I started in 2007, it was, you had 12 weeks of, pregnancy leave. Well, now it's completely changed, and we have a 6-month, and it's now parental leave, and it really has nothing to do with whether you were pregnant or not, and it is for both men and women, and everything has evolved. We've added more time to parental leave. We've expanded who qualifies for it, but we realized that that's just not enough, because practically in the workplace, you are working at a certain point of time, and then you go off on your leave and come back. And in speaking and listening to people that were out on these leaves, we found out that there was a lot of, although grateful for these leaves, there was a lot of feeling of pressure before the leave of, oh my goodness, I have all this stuff to do. And people not giving you work because they didn't really want to give you work because you were leaving. And this sort of, you come back into the office, are adjusting to everything. And some people might not want to overload you. Some people have their own biases that now, maybe you're not going to be committed, and you're suddenly not getting as much work as you used to get or should get, because in a law firm, we do have a billable hour requirement. So to the firm's credit, they then implemented another policy which allows for sort of a ramp down and ramp up, going into your paternal leave and coming out of it, and coming out of your paternal leave back into the workforce, so that you're not expected to, even though technically at the end of the day, that's the there's a certain number of hours you're supposed to bill. We're now prorating that, understanding that this is a big deal in life. And to have an effective workplace and to have people that want to continue to work there, you need to listen and you need to understand what are the challenges that are facing people and women in the workplace. So that's a policy I just think is fantastic. And I love seeing people take advantage of it. We've also seen so many more, spaces that are available, for women who may be breastfeeding or needing to do, need some just downtime. And also through this pandemic, we have, I think it was everybody, as I'm sure can attest, that there was such a shift of, oh my goodness, what do we do? And so many people with young children were, oh my goodness, what do I do? And our firm stepped up and tried to come up with a solution. And we now have a program, Wellthy, WELLTHY, that is a resource that's available to help you find childcare, to help you find elder care for your parents, to help you maybe get the resources that you need, through any kind of therapy or things. So I think it's been really great that our firm, when we talk about the rubber meeting the road, is that we have these policies. Not only do we implement them, but we continue to look at them and evaluate them and see, are they working? Are there ways to improve them? And we also, another great program that we participate is the on-ramp, which is for women that have taken time, stepped out of the law firm life to have kids or for whatever reason, and want to come back. People were afraid to do that. And we participated in a program, it's a nationwide program where we hire a woman who's been out, who's coming back into the workplace, and allow her the flexibility to rejoin the workplace where she might otherwise be afraid to enter it or feel like she's lost the skills. And I think we can all attest technology changes so much that if you're out of the workplace for 5 years and step back in, it's daunting and it's scary. And I'm really proud to be part of a firm that recognizes that and participates in such a great program.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie, for all those wonderful details. I do want to encourage everyone. I see a few people are now putting some comments in the chat. Feel free to throw in any questions that you might have. If there's any follow-ons that you want for our panelists here, this panel will be with you until 10:15 actually. So there's plenty of time to dive deeper into something if there's something that resonates with you. So Lauren, I'd like to turn it back over to you. And let's go back to the very beginning of First Resource, because really the bank isn't that old, right? And I believe you started it with Glenn, if that is correct. Mm-hmm. So maybe give us a little sense of, it sounds like the strategy to have women engaged in the bank was from the get-go. So kind of give us a feeling of how that all came about.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny. It's such an honor to be on this panel and to be recognized as a corporate champion of change. We don't really think we're doing anything all that special. As a matter of fact, I had to be nudged a few times to even apply for this award because we're just being us, right? So it's hard for me to identify a lot of specific programs or things that we're doing because it's in our nature. And we have a line we use around here where culture is everything. And when we opened the bank 16 years ago, Glenn and I started the bank together, and he's been my partner in crime here at the bank. And I told him at the time, I had a 1-year-old. That was crazy. I'm going to go open a bank. I mean, my parents thought I was insane. I luckily had a nice support system at home that let me take that risk. But I had a 1-year-old at home, and I told him before we even started this, I'm going to have another child, know this going in. And he was incredibly supportive and was like, that's great. When you would have 10 kids, we'll make it work. And having a business partner like that was really everything. We're only 16 years old, and we see that as a really big advantage. When you're doing things right from the get-go, you don't necessarily need a lot of plans or programs to change things. What you need is a plan to keep the momentum going. And we do this in a few ways. First, we put a major emphasis on hiring the right people. I am fiercely protective of our culture. We have something really special going on here. We recognize it, and we don't want to jeopardize it as we grow. When we opened in 2005, we had only 11 employees. believe it or not, running a bank with following the same regulations as a Bank of America, banks that have tens of thousands of employees. We've grown to 55. So at 5 times the size, how do we not lose the secret sauce? Well, I interview every single employee that we're considering hiring here, whether they're sweeping the floors or they're the president of the bank. Every single person has to fit the culture, because I can train you to be a banker, but I can't train you to be a decent human being. And it's really one of the fundamental things that has really helped us continue to have a culture that is inclusive and that is just a nice place to work, which is how you get longevity in employees and help people grow in their career paths. What's unique about First Resource Bank is that 4 out of 6 members of our senior management team are women. That's 60%. That is incredibly rare in a bank. That's myself. I'm president and CFO, my chief lending officer, my chief operating officer, and my chief retail officer. So 4 out of 6 seats at that weekly management meeting are women at the table. And the other thing that's really cool about it is that the 4 of us that are at that table have never held those positions before in a prior job. So not only do we have women at the table, but we've created opportunities for those women at the table that they maybe never would have had if had they been someplace else in their career. So with mentoring and training, we all stepped up to the challenge, and I include myself in that group of 4. I was never CFO before, I was never president before, and now here 16 years in, I have a thriving, growing bank that is creating opportunities for other women. So it's been really a tremendous experience, and that mentoring we've identified as a strength of ours, where we welcome people to the table, whether they want to learn, whether I have someone in the branch that wants to learn more about lending, well, go to lunch with the chief lending officer. And that open door policy has really helped people explore. I've had people start as a teller and now they're in the loan department, starting as a teller, now they're in accounting. So creating those opportunities to pursue different interests has been really advantageous for the employees and, quite honestly, the bank. The more well-rounded they are, the better the banker that they are. We know that we are not perfect, no company is, and we often seek feedback as to things that we can do better. We do open forum Q&As, now they're on Zoom, but over the past year, and we, open up, they can ask anything to us and in that open forum, which is, I think, scary for some companies, but we welcome the feedback and the questions, and it's been a great way to kind of self-correct as we've gone through. The past year, we've all been navigating the new normal, and things have been turned on their heads, and being able to adapt to that. It's obviously easier as a small company with only 55 employees, but little things that you can change in any company really can make a big difference in one person's life. So yeah, it's been the design since day one. But we're fiercely trying to continue that momentum, and that's a challenge for us going forward, but we're very focused on it.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. Great perspective. So I want to stay in that theme of strategy, Colleen, and turn it back over to you, because one of your first opening comments last time was that having equity and inclusion, and particularly women that we're focusing on here, built into your strategy. So it's built into the strategy of SEI. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, so what I was talking about with that, Patty, was that we believe that innovation comes from diverse thought, and diverse thought comes from people sitting around a table who think differently. And so we have always positioned ourselves to have people who think differently at the table. And that can be, I love a lot of what Lauren was saying. We've had a lot of success in bringing people that are not from the financial industry to participate in conversations because they think differently. I remember being at an offsite for a leadership team, and at our table, we had a real estate agent come and sit. And the real estate agent just started asking us questions about how we came up with our recommendation. And they just looked at the world so differently than the people that were sitting around the table. And I found that so incredibly valuable. And so I think, making sure that you have that diversity of thought, and, in the 2020 for all of us, I'm sure on this call, was just a unique year. But in 2020, making sure that we had that diverse thought constantly present and making sure that we're making decisions with that voice in mind has been incredibly important to us. You know, we have great affinity groups at SEI. I'm really proud of especially the SEI Women's Network, and they have really stepped up over the last year and helped us make decisions around a lot like what Stephanie was talking about. How do we help parents manage being a teacher and a full-time employee? You know, the year of COVID has really taught all of us so many lessons and proved how important it is to have affinity groups within your organizations and have those groups come forward and help you make a lot of these decisions. There were a couple other programs, Patty, if it's okay, that I wanted to just call out that we look at SEI. The SEI Women's Network, I'm really proud of something that they've launched, which is our Emerging Leaders Program, which is making sure that we have college and high school aged girls come on campus and learn a little bit about what it's like to have careers in STEM. We have a neurodiversity program at work that we've had in motion, I think, for close to 4 or 5 years now, and it's doing incredibly well. Again, also putting together people who think differently. And Stephanie talked a little bit about it. We don't call it on-ramping, we call them returnships. And I would say that it's not just stay-at-home moms, but it's women, men, military, anybody who has had an absence from the actual their working career and need to transition back into. And so like even on my HR team, I've hired 3 return to work moms and had incredible experiences with all of them. And it's like, what's the value add of people coming into your organization? And then one of the things that's very tactical that we did. So remember when I talked about the Get, Grow, Keep campaign, I said that we saw that we had women falling off from the supervisor level to the manager level. Well, you know, when I went into that program, we really thought it was going to be an external recruiting experience, like how are we going to get more candidates into the recruiting pool? And what we learned from that was that it was just as important for us to focus on the internal recruiting. And so we recently launched a program that's called SEI Pathways. And we all know the statistics where it says a man can feel 40% qualified and he'll apply for a job, and a woman needs to feel 80 or 90% qualified to apply for a job. Well, we've embedded artificial intelligence in our SEI Pathways so that it will push jobs to women in particular. It doesn't, and I turned off the function of how qualified are you for the job, because I don't want women to not feel that they're qualified enough for the job, but they can proactively get jobs coming to them so that it'll actually suggest career paths for you within the organization. That's just really launched at the beginning of this. We launched it in November, and the artificial intelligence needs to learn from itself if you're familiar with those systems, but we're really optimistic that that's going to help us have women within the organization applying for more senior positions.
Pretty amazing stuff. Excuse me, my phone is ringing here. Some pretty amazing stuff that everyone's been sharing with us. It's really great. And I do see there's a couple of questions in the chat. Is there anything else before I move off this rubber to the road? Is there any other program or policy that I may have missed from any of your organizations? If so, you can unmute, or we'll move on to some of the other questions that we want to cover this morning before we wrap up this session.
Yeah, I'd say one quick thing that I'd like to cover is we certainly have had, as I mentioned, our Women's Initiative Network, or WIN, for a period of time, looking at launching. We launched 2 other EBRGs, and then unfortunately because of COVID, we have to relaunch. But the other thing that we are really starting this year is launching a CEO-led inclusion council. And on some level we say, well, why didn't we do that before? But what we really find is the voice of leadership and the modeling of leadership and their ability to really demonstrate this is important. And we have our eye on this and we care about this and we're going to be very active, I think is such an important component of sending those messages throughout the organization. And so that's one of the areas that we're also going to be focusing on this year.
Great, thank you. I have one question that actually is for Lauren as a small organization, but if anyone else has a follow-on after Lauren responds that you'd like to add, that's great as well. So as a small institution, does First Resource seek to achieve racial and ethnic diversity as well in their senior positions?
Yeah, it's a good question. Certainly that is our goal. So we have 2 challenges to that, and we acknowledge that that's something that we need to work on. One of the challenges is I don't have a lot of turnover. So I don't have a lot of openings. If my bank is 16 years old, I probably have 10 people who have already had 15-year anniversaries, which is a testimony to the culture that we don't have a lot of turnover, but it also doesn't create a ton of opportunities at the top for new recruitment there. And one of the other challenges is that we struggle with getting a diverse applicant pool. So one of the projects that we're looking at internally is recruiting from different sources and being more intentional about where we're trying to recruit new talent. It's been something we haven't used the headhunter route much, but we may need to go that route. And financially, it hasn't really been in our budget to do that, but it's certainly something that's on our radar. So I appreciate the question.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I would just add, Patty, that I think, and Lauren, I'm very optimistic. I mean, the way that we look at work has changed through COVID, and that so many of us went remote. And so I am optimistic that we are now not as limited to our geographical areas. And so I'm hopeful that that will help us with recruiting and being able to recruit more diverse candidates internally and externally.
Great, thank you, Colleen. So let's have our final section here and talk about a few questions. I think, Maureen, this first one we were going to field to you. How do you get others to buy into your approach, and how do you shift the culture? What tools do you use to maintain engagement beyond one-off programs?
Yeah, and so part of it I mentioned in terms of the CEO Inclusion Council. And so, you know, it has to be, for change to happen, it has to be continuous. Too often what happens is we will launch something, there'll be a lot of energy, and then over time, because other things encroach, or we get busy, or our focus changes, or we have crises like COVID that pops up, and so then that focused attention then dissipates, and it begins to sink in people's memories, or it slips to the back burner. And so for us, it's how do we keep it front and center? And so one of the ways we're doing that is really to have a comprehensive communication strategy, so that we're continually thinking about how do we refresh, how do we revitalize the message, and taking advantage of the tools that we have. So for example, we have we call it InterWest, it's our internal communications platform, and information platform. And so we're continually looking at how can we utilize that, and also do things through that platform where it's much more interactive. So as opposed to kind of a one-dimensional, one-directional sharing of information, it's Black History Month, so let's just push some information out to you. How can we also make it interactive and dynamic, so that people have an opportunity to contribute? And so for us, because as I said earlier, our value is around One West, one of the things that we really are trying to drive home through our communication strategy is that idea of One West, where it is all of us. It is about us learning about each other. It is about us having conversations with each other and talking to each other and sharing who we are. So I think people are naturally curious. So having that as a platform is one way that we keep it front and center. Another thing that really becomes important, particularly from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, is data. And are you really tracking information? Are you diving into the organization to see where are those problems and challenges, as well as where are your strengths and opportunities? So for example, as we look back at the last time we did an employee experience survey was in 2017, and which is why we're relaunching again this year. And one of the things that was really fascinating to see is, and one of the more positive areas on that survey was people's sentiments about diversity and where they thought the organization was. And so that's important information for us to be able to say that there is some degree of a natural affinity. So how do we continue to capture that and engage that and keep that going, both through communications as well as the things that we want to do around education? I think that one of the things that we are probably doing less of is kind of generalized unconscious bias or diversity training. It's there, but I think what we do want to emphasize more, as I talked about earlier, is how do you embed that in the moments that matter? So it's almost like bringing it to where people are in their day-to-day jobs, and how do you kind of make it alive at that level of the organization so that they see that we are committed, and they also see that they have a voice, and they see that we're growing, and they see that we're trying to get better as well. So I think it's also being willing to kind of experiment and try new things as well. We're focusing on a lot on high performing teams. And what does it mean to be a high performing team? And one of the critical aspects or elements of a high performing team is its diversity and its ability to engage diversity of thought. So I think it's a lot of these different ways and things that we're doing that we're trying to keep this idea alive and very much relevant to what people do in their day-to-day lives.
Great, thanks, Maureen. So one for you, Stephanie. How do you move people along in the journey when you feel they may feel personally threatened by the outcome?
Well, I think it's trying to understand why they feel threatened. You know, everyone brings their own journey. You know, as Maureen said, with, you know, you have 9,000, 8,000 people, everybody has their own journey and experience. I think it's important to realize and understand, and at least try to understand, why would someone feel threatened by this? I mean, so many times we can sit back and say, well, this, you know, I can say as a woman, well, it's so great to have this opportunity and this extra time, you know, when you're out on maternity leave or coming back. And I think it's just trying to teach and to explain to people, you know, number one, it's understanding why they feel threatened. Number two, sort of acknowledging that. Number three, explaining to them the reason behind the policy. And if you have results of it already, sharing those positive outcomes with people, because I think that by doing that, you can helpfully, you know, make them feel recognized and understood, but also try and move the needle and get them to buy in with you and to understand that while this, you know, nobody likes, a lot of people don't like change. I won't say nobody, because sometimes people do like change. A lot of people find change hard. And so I think you have to just acknowledge that and try and get people to buy in and be on your team and to see the benefits of these policies and changes, to benefit not just the group of people that are, you know, immediately benefiting from the policy, but how your company as a whole is going to benefit from it.
Great, thank you. So as we get towards the end of this segment, I'd like to get a little bit more personal here. And this might be a question that all of you can field. And I'm going to start with Colleen. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the mistakes that you may have made along the way and some of the lessons that you've learned through those years, and what the impact has been on the organization, perhaps?
Sure, absolutely, Patty. So one of the assumptions that I made at the beginning in 2018, when we said that we were going to try to get more women into leadership roles, was that we said for every senior leadership role that we're going to have, let's make sure we have one woman on interview for that job. And then I think it was 6 months later, I read the Harvard Business School study that says when you have one of anything, it makes them a target for all the reasons why they're not a good fit for that job. So we have adjusted that and said, let's not have the goal of one woman or minority interviewing for a senior level role, but instead at least two. And so that was a lesson that we learned. The other thing I learned is that we can talk about the things that we need to do. Like, for example, we talk about unbundling the recruiting process and making sure that we don't do culture fit until the end of the recruiting process. And instead we do technical fit at the beginning. And we can talk about that we need to have a diverse interview team for everybody, every single position that we interview for. But when the rubber meets the road and people are really busy, it's really hard for them to remember that they have to include that diverse person in the interview team, or they have to make sure that they're following the proper process. So just because we say we're going to do it, it doesn't necessarily mean it makes it all the way down. And it doesn't necessarily mean that when people are especially in the last year, as overly busy as they are, that they're going to remember that they have to take that into account. You have to constantly reinforce it and make sure that people are following through with what you say you're going to do.
Great, thank you. So Lauren, I'd like you to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced personally and how you responded to those challenges.
Sure, I'm a big believer in you learn a lot from seeing people do the wrong thing. I like learning, watching other people make mistakes and then making sure that I do the opposite. So over my career, I've had the stereotypical horrible female role model. When I was first out of college, I literally was working for someone who forgot to pick up their child from daycare at the end of the day. I was like, this is never going to be me. This is never going to be me. And it's not me. But learning about priorities, right? You can totally kick butt at work and you can totally kick butt at home, and they might not always be on the same day, but in general, it kind of all evens out. When I was first starting out as a working mother, I had a 1-year-old daughter who was sick all the time. That poor girl, her ears were clogged nonstop. She couldn't walk. She was so messed up, just being in daycare, right? It's what happens. We've all been through it. But every time I had to go to my boss and say, I got to go to daycare to go pick up my daughter, it was not welcome. And it made me feel like I was a horrible employee and a horrible mother. And there were points where I thought, what am I doing here? And incidentally, that daughter was a Gab girl. Shout out to the Gab program. That was tremendous. But she can walk now and is quite a young, strong female. So that's exciting. But anyway, my point was having that employer that's not understanding that people have a life outside work and responsibilities outside work. I was shocked at, this is 2004 and this is what I'm dealing. This isn't 1950. And you don't forget those lessons. Even earlier on in my career, I was requesting an early promotion, and it was a very regimented track. You were a first year, you were a second year, then you were this, then you were that. And they were putting me in proposals as a manager. And I said, I'm not a manager, I think I should be a manager. And they told me, we can't do that. And then one of my male peers got that promotion early. And I was done. I left. I am very intolerant of an environment like that. So I left that job. I left the other job with the boss that wasn't good with my sick kid. And, I took a huge leap and started my own company. So it was a huge risk, but that's how I responded, because I can't work for people I don't respect. And I created my own culture, but you don't need to do the huge thing like I did. I think too often we still see women not supporting women in the workplace. That costs nothing. That's free to just create an environment where we're supporting each other with whatever we have going on, whether it's a sick parent or a nonprofit that you're involved in, that you're trying to get through some challenges, or you're raising kids. There's ways that we can all work better together to support each other, individually succeed, and then the company succeeds better as well. So I like to learn from other people's mistakes, and I like to think I'm not repeating the things that I was horrified by early in my career.
Great, thanks, Lauren.
Mm-hmm.
So Maureen and Stephanie, any final thoughts from you on your personal side, or mistakes or lessons learned as we wrap up this session?
I would say for me, patience is probably been, and sometimes checking myself, because I've been having conversations within organizations around diversity for about 30 years now, 30 plus. And so there's a part of me that says, we should have been further along by now. And why are we still having the same conversations that we've been having? And so for me, it is then kind of stepping myself back and saying, people are where they are. And you have to kind of start with where they are and help to then move the needle and the thinking and the mindset forward. And so for me, that is just kind of keeping the long game in mind and understanding that, like any change, particularly change, I think diversity is a little bit different because it does really require you to do some internal work and challenging, what you think, what you believe, what your own actions, what your own behaviors, the kind of impact that you might be having. And so that just takes time. And so for me, I would say patience.
I would just, say I feel so lucky and so blessed that, I've since graduating from law school in 1997, I've only had 2 employers, both of which have had wonderful philosophies, wonderful attitudes towards women in the workplace. And I think, you always have your one-offs, but, I don't know whether it's just my philosophy and sort of my attitude that landed me in the right places. But I think, as Lauren said, I don't think I would have been able to, put up with a place that had such, horrendous attitudes. I don't think that's not my personality. I'm a very positive person. I like to surround myself with people that, sort of feel the same way, that are, open to change. And I feel really, really lucky to be in places, and I was very happy in my last job. And I'll never forget, my mother said to me, my son was 2 and I was going from part-time work to a full-time position at Fox. And I remember my mother saying to you, I hope you're as happy a year from now as you are now. As only an Irish mother could, put the guilt on you. And, here I am 14 years later and absolutely just so happy with my decision. And I really hope for everyone that they find that place for them that, supports them and, nurtures them and is open to change to help their organizations grow and to become better.
Great. Thanks so much, Stephanie. And thank you to all of our panelists here this morning, Stephanie, Lauren, Colleen, And Maureen, I hope that everyone has enjoyed learning more about what their companies do to support women in the workplace and also diversity in general in the workplace. I think it was a really great follow-on to our opening speaker, and I look forward to hearing from our Gladys Black Award winners a little bit later on this morning. So I'll turn it back over to you, Michelle or Brandon, or who's ever going to facilitate the next the breakout sessions. And thanks, everyone. Have a great day.